Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Striking a Balance Caregiver Conference. I'm Rob Fabian with Age of Central Texas, and along with our partners at the Area Agency on Aging for the Capital Area, we are so excited that you are joining us this afternoon for this incredible session with Marty Richards. We have been bringing you the Caregiver Conference now for 19 years. And this is our first year to be virtual. And so if along the way today we have a few little technical hiccups, please forgive us because we're kind of learning as we go. But we have had tremendous 3 days of conference presentations. We have one more day tomorrow. And today's presentation we are very excited about because it is a topic that caregivers who have been coming for several years to the conference have been requesting. And it took us a couple of years to find the right person to address it. And so today we're going to talk about what happens when my caregiving journey ends and I'm no longer the caregiver. So it's going to be a fantastic day. Before we get started with our session though, got a couple of very quick videos we want to show you. Our executive directors from the Area Agency on Aging and Age of Central Texas would like to personally welcome you to the conference. And then we have a video from our presenting sponsor, who is our friends over at AARP Texas.
Hello everybody, welcome to the 19th annual Striking a Balance Caregiver Conference, brought to you by the Area Agency on Aging of the Capital Area and Age of Central Texas. We are so happy to have you join us at our first ever virtual conference. We were talking about doing this and, we had a little bit of fear and trepidation, and then we thought, well, all of the caregivers that I know exude resiliency, they exude strength, they always have the ability to turn on a dime. So we thought, well, you know what? We better honor them and we better do the same thing and host this conference virtually so that we would have the opportunity to engage with y'all again. Some of you might know that we had a lot of repeat caregivers attending our conference every year. We didn't want to let them down, but we also did not want to miss out on bringing in new caregivers. And virtually, we have the opportunity to do that even more. We are so excited to have you join us in a number of sessions that will address some of the issues that you might encounter during your caregiver journey. I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne.
Hi all, my name is Suzanne Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Age of Central Texas. And like Patty, I am so glad you've chosen to participate in the 19th annual Striking a Balance Conference. And what I love, in addition to what Patty just shared, is that if you chose, you could be sitting here in your PJs if you're so inclined. So, a special thank you to the Area Agency on Aging. Patty Bordy and her staff have been exceptional. In addition, a special thank you to Rob Fabian of Age of Central Texas, whose leadership and technology skills have really allowed us to offer it in this format. I want to just share a quote. It's one of my favorites that I apply to my life, depending on where I sit within different challenges. And believe it or not, it's from Lena Horne. And what she said is that it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. So, we know caregiving is full of, swirling things like joy and love and stress. And I could go on and on that one. But we hope through the conference you find new strategies to help you carry that proverbial load, and that you feel supported by AGE and the AAA, and that know that we're here for you. So thanks so much for joining us in the conference, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Take care.
Hello, I'm Jessica Lemon of AARP Texas, and I am pleased that AARP is a proud sponsor of the Striking a Balance Caregiver Conference. As a sponsor, we hope that you are gaining new insights into family caregiving and that you have the opportunity to connect with other caregivers and experts on aging. Family caregiving is a priority for AARP. It's essential to our work today, but that's not all. AARP is doing amazing things to make life better for the age 50+ population and generations that follow. We help people improve their financial well-being and their health. We want people to contribute to society and local communities and to fully enjoy life. Let's take a moment to discover more about what we're up to at AARP.
Our story begins more than 60 years ago inside an abandoned chicken coop. where our founder discovered a retired teacher living, no home, no health care. So she said no to this injustice and yes to transforming lives. It's this drive, this compassion that inspired AARP. Today, we empower people to choose how they live as they age. We advocate for health and financial security. We strengthen communities everywhere. We are AARP, creating real possibilities.
I want you to know that AARP has a strong presence throughout Texas in many communities in this great state, including Austin, the capital city where I live and work. This year, AARP Texas is bringing opportunities to our members and others through virtual events like this one we're participating in today, and on platforms like Facebook Live. We hope you have the opportunity to enjoy these free offerings. Not only are there programs to help unpaid family caregivers, but there are presentations to help people avoid being the victims of fraud. We host fitness seminars, and we work with city leaders towards making this an even more age-friendly community. And know this, volunteers are critical to our mission. There are many opportunities for those who can give a little time to volunteer. You can learn more about these local happenings at aarp.org/tx or catch us at the AARP Texas Facebook page. Again, of course, family caregiving is a priority. Here in Texas and across the country, AARP is working with governors, state legislators, and community partners to take common sense steps to support America's 40 million family caregivers. We know that caregivers help their older parents, spouses, and loved ones live independently at home. And right now, AARP is fighting to protect nursing home residents against sickness, neglect, and isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic, while also educating family caregivers on how to advocate for their loved ones. Sadly, more than 62,000 nursing home residents and staff at those facilities have died from COVID-19, and the death toll continues to mount. These are mothers, fathers, grandparents, and spouses with families who love them. Nobody should be going through what nursing home residents and their families are experiencing today. Families want elected leaders to take action now to protect residents of nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. Right now, no state is doing a good enough job to protect these residents and staff. Congress must take immediate action to provide regular testing and personal protective equipment for residents and staff. There should also be timely and reliable reporting of COVID-19 cases and deaths. There also must be virtual visitation allowed for families. And finally, we urge lawmakers not to let nursing homes off the hook for abuse, neglect, and even death. Now is not the time to strip away the rights of nursing home residents. AARP will continue to fight for family caregivers and other families. We appreciate your support and for listening. We have many resources available for family caregivers just like you. One place to go for information is aarp.org/caregiving. Thank you for listening, and thank you for all that you do as family caregivers or to support caregivers.
Thank you, Patty and Suzanne, and thank you, Jessica. Before we get started with our presentation, got just a few little housekeeping issues we want to go over for you. Number one, we are recording this session. So if for any reason you get knocked off or you have to leave today before we finish, don't worry, we're recording and we are going to post the video on YouTube. We're going to send you that link a little bit later in this week. We're also going to send you the links to all the handouts and materials that have been discussed throughout all of the sessions so that you'll have all of that. Plus, we're going to send you a PDF of the PowerPoint from today's session and links to all of them from the previous sessions as well. Now, speaking of PDFs, when you got your email to remind you about today's session, we also included 3 links to PDFs that were listed in that email. We sent you a link to the program for the conference, so take a look at that because not only does it have the bios for all of our speakers, but also lots of great information is included there. We also sent you the handouts from the speakers, and so you'll have that available to you. And then we also sent you some caregiver resources. Both Age of Central Texas and the Area Agency on Aging put together a collection of caregiver resources so that you would have those handy. Because the reason we have been doing this for 19 years, bringing you this conference, is because we want to give you the tools and the resources and the education and everything you need for your caregiving journey. Because we realize that everyone's journey is different. Everybody's journey changes as we go. And so we want to arm you with as much as you need to be able to be an effective caregiver. Finally, want to tell you about the chat feature. Located right down here, you're going to see what looks like a little cartoon bubble, the kind you see in the comic strips. That's the chat feature. We want you to click on that, and we want you to ask questions during Marty's presentation. Because at the end of the presentation, we're going to answer your questions. We're going to have a facilitated Q&A. Now, because we are live and we only have a limited amount of time today, we might not get to everybody's question. But fear not, we are going to answer your questions. If we do run out of time, someone from either Age of Central Texas or the Area Agency on Aging is going to email you directly and answer your questions. Because again, we're doing this for you. We want you to have your answers. We want you to have the resources that you need. Also in the chat feature, when you click on there, you're going to see a message that says if you're having technical difficulties, to call Michelle Davis over the Area Agency on Aging. If something happens during the presentation and you lose us and you can't get back in, give her a call, because we have got some tech experts standing by. They are actually retirees from the tech field who are volunteering with us today, who are standing by in the event that you need some help with the session. So we're going to take care of you every way we can. One thing that keeps coming up in all of our presentations is the simple reminder that you are never alone as a caregiver. We have resources, we have people available. We're here to help you on that journey. And today we're going to talk about what happens when that journey concludes. So it's my pleasure to reintroduce Patricia Bordy, who is the Executive Director of the Area Agency on Aging for the Capital Area. She is going to introduce our speaker, and then she's going to facilitate our Q&A later on this afternoon. So Patricia, take it away.
Thank you, Rob. I feel like the lucky one today. When I reached out and raised my hand to volunteer to introduce a speaker, I had to pick this session. This session is near and dear to my heart because in my family, we are actually living through this even as we speak. My in-laws, my mother and father-in-law, my courageous caregiver husband, Ralph's parents passed away earlier this year, pretty close to each other. And so right now we are dealing with what do we do now that we're at the end of this journey. But we're also talking to caregivers who may be at the end of the journey because their loved one went into a long-term care facility, or they needed to bring somebody else in to do more of the hands-on care and they're not doing that piece anymore. So we're really happy that you've chosen this session. We know you will get a lot out of it, and we absolutely look forward to your questions. So don't be shy about asking questions later on. And I get to now introduce Marty Richards. For more than 40 years, Marty Richards, MSW, has worked with older adults and in their families in long-term care facilities and in the community. She taught at the University of Washington School of Social Work and with a certificate program in gerontology for more than 30 years. She currently serves on the Washington State Dementia Action Collaborative. She is the author of the book Care Sharing, a reciprocal approach to caregiving and care receiving in the complexities of aging, illness, or disability. During her career, she has worked with family carers and staff of many workplaces to look at and cope with stress. She believes that keeping a sense of hope is critical in taking care of ourselves and those with whom we share in our work. She currently lives in Port Townsend, Washington. Welcome back, Marty.
So I was telling people earlier that one of the blessings of COVID is I've learned to use Zoom, sort of. And one of the banes is I've learned to use Zoom, sort of. Well, I'm really glad to be here this afternoon to explore this question of what happens after the main part of my caregiving journey ends. And as Patty mentioned, we have all kinds of situations that we find ourselves in. Maybe we're here because we lost the person we cared for to death. Maybe that person's now living in long-term care. Maybe they're living in an adult family home or somewhere else. And with the limits of COVID, all kinds of new experiences of not being connected exist. It's a hard topic to talk about, and we look at this road. I think this is how it is. It is a winding road, it is an uneven road, and it goes up and down, and there's all kinds of emotional and physical and spiritual issues that go along with it. And so today, I don't have all the answers, and please know that each experience that you have is different, but you are not alone. There are others who've gone through it. There are others who are struggling now. There are others who could use your support and you could use their support. So you are not alone. But I also feel that when we take time to look at it and to take time to be compassionate and have mercy with ourselves as we look at this, we can be stronger and we can face our way forward in a new and different light. So some of the goals for this afternoon, and I guess it's afternoon there, it's still morning here in Port Townsend, which is 2 hours difference. I want us to begin to think of the issues around grief's impact on the post-care sharing journey. A lot of the care sharing journey has to do with dealing with grief. And it's especially difficult as we get to these end stages or end times or after that time. Want us to be looking at the idea of resilience and self-care and how we can put that into motion, into action for ourselves. Want to explore some ways to construct identity in a, quote, new normal time. And some of us were talking before the conference session today about this time of COVID may go on with us for a long time. And I was reminded when I was younger about the scare that polio was. And now in my 70s, I have friends who have issues with post-polio syndrome that last even this long. And this may be true for some of the follow through with COVID as well. And then I want us, because we go to so many workshops where we hear good ideas and I'm going to get around to it and I'm going to do something, I want us to begin to think on working on our own personal plans for a different reality. And again, everybody is different and no one cookbook has all the recipes or one size fits all and, to answer the questions in dealing with the caregiving journey. And the journey of care sharing really, and it's been said before, is a marathon and not a sprint. And if we look at this picture, I think this is how many of us feel in the caregiving journey. I currently am a long distance caregiver for a younger sister who is struggling with MS and has in the last 2 months been in and out of long-term care in the hospital several times as she deals with falls and heart issues, etc. It's been a hard time for me, and yet I've also been a caregiver over time to others in my family. And even now, this many years later, I still remember them and some of the issues that were there as we went through caregiving and dealing with chronic illness and dementia and all of the social and emotional and spiritual and resource issues that went along with that. So let's take a minute again to think about this idea of grief and loss. And there's some things that I really want to stress because I think if we're on this place at the end of times of the journey, we may be thinking we're alone. We're not alone. Others have faced it, but we experience it our own way. And what we need to remember, and one recent widow said to me, I wish people would let me just experience this in my own way and to not tell me how I ought to feel. You feel what you feel. You experience what you experience. Nobody else can experience that for you. They can listen, they can be empathetic, but your journey is uniquely your own. And each person deals with losses and grief in their own way. And I think this is hard. If we have an idea of how we deal with grief and how grief ought to be dealt with, we can lay that on the people around us, or they can lay it on us. And it is true that people around you may not get it. And that's hard for us to experience. When my daughter was born 50 years ago tomorrow, she was born a preemie, and my aunt, who is as I have told some of you, the wind beneath my wings my whole life, had been my support, my carer, the person who cared about me just about as much as anybody. And she wasn't there for me, and I couldn't get why she couldn't talk about it. Later, after some time, my aunt, who'd been the primary carer for my grandpa when he died, a pretty long caregiving process, said to me, I was so afraid your daughter was going to die that I couldn't deal with you at the time. And it wasn't that she didn't care, it was that she had been dealing with my grandpa's caregiving issues, and she could not be a support to me. And I couldn't figure out why she didn't get it. But other people around you may be dealing with grief in a different way. And that's always stuck with me, because my aunt truly was a light in my life through all of my life. And we were later able to talk about it, but sometimes people can't. I think it's important to remember that grieving is not a linear process. It goes in cycles. So I'm missing my Aunt Tony. She died in 2006, but a day doesn't go by, even getting my slides ready and thinking about this topic, that I don't think about her. She read everything I ever wrote. And believe me, some of the articles I write are pretty clinical. And she had comments about them. And even at 103, when she was dying and I was with her, this process of sharing still continued. And she still lives in my heart. It's been said, death ends a life, but not a relationship. And that's certainly true for many of us. And it was certainly true for Tony. And I'll be talking a little more about her. There may be no resolution to a loss, and that's hard to take. Any of us who've had people missing in action in Vietnam, or we've had other situations where there was no resolution, or there's been a crime and the body was never found, those kinds of things, there's no resolution. And to some extent, because of what COVID has done to us now in terms of our loved ones going to hospitals where we can't hold their hand at the end, or there aren't ways of doing the goodbyes in the way we're used to, there may be no resolution. That's reality. Culture and family influence how loss and grief are experienced, and how family caregiving is experienced too. I'm the oldest of 8 in a family of children. When I was supposed to stay in Chicagoland and take care of my parents, and I didn't tend, my culture is, and my family is saying, why weren't you there when they needed you? So I ended up being a long distance care. It's important to remember that some losses are obvious and some are subtle. I think we can, as a first step, begin to acknowledge and name losses, because this is beneficial to us to be able to deal with them. What happens if you're a current carer or one who's recently given up that role is those losses may expose past loss and grief, especially unresolved grief. Let me give you an example. So there are people in the caregiving role who may have experienced a miscarriage, or they may have experienced the loss of a relationship through a divorce or other unsettling situations, and that never got totally resolved. Now they're dealing with the loss of this person they've cared for so long, and that unresolved grief sometimes bubbles up to the surface and becomes an issue again. What we know, if we shortcut this and don't deal with the difficult losses, it can cause more complicated grief, and that can be a problem for our day-to-day life. So right now I'd like you to do just a moment of reflection and think about for yourself some of the losses you have experienced in being a care partner, or that you face now in not being a hands-on direct care partner. And if you go down to your chat box, if you could enter just a word or two about some of those things that you have been facing. If we were in person, we could be talking about this together, but it helps, I think, to get an idea of where you're all at in your journey. If you could just share for a moment a word or two about what you experienced. Being locked out of my mother's nursing home from Loretta, boy, this is such an issue right now. And from Serena, extra time and feeling like you're forgetting to do something, for sure. And the routine of what you were used to isn't there in the same way anymore. And from Roger, losing dear friends and the sadness and pain of it. Yeah. And from Ina, I couldn't be the caring sister my brother needed when he was going through drug issues related to PTSD. Really difficult. And Diggs M, an empty void. These are really important experiences that you all have. And and from Chris, not knowing what was my most important job. Lost knowing what was my important job, caring for my husband. Yes. The loss of the mother-daughter relationship I envisioned for us traveling. We're unable to do those things. From Karen, people sharing their happy anniversary notes on Facebook can sadden people. Oh, anniversaries are tough. I'll talk more about that. Jessica, picking up the phone and remembering she's not going to answer. Recently, I found myself getting ready to call my mother's home phone number, and she's been gone 20 years. And it's amazing to me that I almost picked up the phone to call that number. So this doesn't just end, this goes on for a lifetime. But I think the kinds of things you're sharing are very important. Lost sharing, doing jobs with my husband, from Razel, and from Denise, questioning decisions I made about her care. Oh man, okay, powerful. Well, I'm going to move on. And a lot of you have come up with really good ideas. Oh, sharing with my mom about my children, yes. When I wrote my book, my Aunt Tony wasn't there. She had read everything I've ever written. She was there when I was writing it, but never could read it. Death of husbands, murder, son's suicide, 2 other husbands' death, prostate and dementia, husband now dementia. Lots of losses starting at 33 years old. Oh my goodness. Yes, and that's true. Oh, very hard. And Teresa, husband died in hospital last month. I had to give them DNR or approval, but I could not be with him. Dealing with his special needs daughter who doesn't live with me, and his problem grandson who does not live with me temporarily. My goodness, so much pain and so much grief. Well, these are the kinds of things we keep processing when we may not be the primary carer anymore, but they're still really painful and powerful things to deal with. I want to make one quick comment about the anniversaries. One of the things that I've done with my family and people have done for me is to keep track of anniversary dates, the anniversary of an anniversary, the anniversary of a death, the anniversary of a birthday, and then call me. My pastor did that for people in our congregation, and my mother, who died, the anniversary of the date of her birthday always stays with me. For my brother who died of a brain tumor several years ago, and my church community was with me, I got a call from my pastor to say, are you doing okay? Is everything all right? I know it's the anniversary. To remember those days. And that I think if we're helping someone who's going through this, we remember to do that. And our neighbor just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of his wife's death, and he talked about how difficult that day was. And somebody she'd ridden her horse with wrote to him yesterday, and he said that meant so much to remember their riding together and the fact that it was the anniversary and that I would be thinking about this. So these kinds of things, if people want to be helpful or you want to be helpful to someone else, I found helpful. Some of the loss post-care direct caregiving include the relationship and companionship, which may have changed in the time of dementia or post-stroke or whatever else you're dealing with. I think one of the hardest, and for me this has been the hardest in some of the losses that I've had, is the remembered shared history. This happens in dementia, but it also happens when that person who I've been married to my husband 53 years. We have 53 years of shared memories. And if he weren't there, would we have that time of anybody who knew what I went through in the 60s? And those are the kinds of things we deal with. Change, hopes, and dreams. A story brought this so poignantly home to me was of a couple who had bought a camper out here in our beautiful Pacific Northwest to be able to go camping. And before they were able to use it, the husband had a stroke, but the camper stood in their driveway. And the wife said, as a caregiver, looking at that camper, we didn't have the ability to follow our hopes and dreams for an RV life after retirement. And this morning we talked about the importance of meaning in caregiving and purpose in caregiving. And what's your meaning and purpose now that you don't do direct care? That sort of came up in some of the answers that we had as well. It is difficult when we feel like we're in a place with no meaning and purpose. And it's made worse because some of the things we might do in connecting with other people, we now do with the mask, or we do from a social distance, or on Zoom, or some other way. Certainly there are different roles. Somebody mentioned this, changes in structured and unstructured time. What am I supposed to do now? I don't know about all of you, but the whole COVID situation, I don't have a good sense of time anymore. I don't go to meetings, they're on Zoom. I don't go to church, I go on Zoom. I do go to the market, but it's a very different experience than what it was before. I get in and get out on my way home. And then all of the challenges in connection to others through COVID-19 and other limits as well. And the person who talked about their loved one being in the nursing home and dying, that's at the hospital. It's difficult. It's difficult. So the first thing is to begin to look at some of those losses and to name them, because when we name things, they sometimes lose the power that they have over us. They don't go away, but we can learn to do some adaptive things to deal with them, and we can learn to take them off in chunks to deal with. Grief overload is when we have one grief after another grief, after another grief, after another grief, after another grief. That's caregiving for so many of us. There are the little losses, the ability not to have dinner time conversation that was always had. There are the major losses as a person gets more close to death or is dealing with the chronic illness getting much worse and not remembering who you are as your wife or your partner of 50 years. For many carers, this is a hard one. And then when they're not physically in your care anymore, they've gone to the long-term care setting or they have died. It is difficult, or maybe even some ways difficult. I have a friend whose father is quite ill and is assisted living, lives with his mother. His father has to have carers who come in and care for him. And his mother, who'd been caring for his dad, is now feeling really bad because she did things that the caregivers are doing, and she feels like he's getting more attention than she is. And my friend is saying it's hard to watch his parents who've been married for so many years deal with those little losses of bathing him and moving him into bed and things like that, versus the major losses of a major heart illness and cancer. There's a sense of too muchness. It's just too much to cope with, and losses compound. So by dealing with this, I think it's important that we realize that grief can feel like it's gray and stormy all the time. Now, where I live in Port Townsend, it is gray and stormy a lot of the time, but then we have beautiful summers like we have now. But it is important to realize that these exist, that we name them, and then we can begin to deal with them. But I want to talk a little bit about something that often doesn't get talked about, and that's anticipatory grief. Somebody has an amputation, you see a loss, you can deal with it. It's not easy, but there's something you can see. But the anticipatory loss of knowing that somebody's dementia is going to get worse and need long-term care, or the anticipation that someone's got 3 months to live, or the anticipation that your loss as a primary carer may change because you may not physically be able to pick them off the floor if they fall. Anticipatory grief occurs incrementally, and it needs naming, but it certainly puts us all in limbo who face this. One very wise nurse whose mother had dementia cared for her at home for a very long time, and she worked for the state and knew about grief and loss. And her mom's dementia got worse, and she said, I thought I had done all the grieving I needed to do for my mom, because she was still a person, but she wasn't my mom in the way that I knew her. We couldn't share that mother-daughter relationship, as somebody mentioned on the chat. But she said, what I wasn't prepared for was the second wave of grief when she died. And she said, I realized I was grieving for the sweet little old lady she'd become, even though she wasn't my mother in the way that I had known her over time. And anticipatory grief puts us in limbo, and that's where some of you are right now, where you know that the time of your being able to care is limited, or it has ended because of the death or somebody moving into a place where you can't have access to them. So the sense of anticipatory grief is important, but also we need to look at ambiguous loss. And this is a concept to which I want to attribute to Pauline Boss, who's a psychologist and has written wonderful work about ambiguous loss. And there are references at the end of this talk and this workshop that refer to her books, and I would suggest to you, especially her one about ambiguous loss with people struggling with dementia, are really excellent. As caring progresses, losses accumulate. I'm not telling you all anything. There may not be an opportunity to resolve them, but unresolved grief prevents moving on. What we know is that grief can be frozen in time and put on hold, but it still affects us. It's a roller coaster of losing and finding over and over. And I love this image of this that Pauline uses. And it's emotional quicksand. If you've ever been caught in quicksand and feel like you're being sucked in. People say they feel that way. And balancing, again, this conference is about balancing the present reality in face of the future become important. And I really want to stress here, the moment is sacred that we have with the person, whether they totally get everything that's going on mentally or not. And we have to celebrate that. But we also have to do the planning for the future that we heard about from Amy Goyer yesterday, and we hear about in a lot of the resource talks about getting your paperwork in order for living wills and durable powers of attorney and all those kinds of things as well. But never lose fact that in that time that there is this present to deal with. Uncertainties are difficult. And one of the questions that came up this morning is, how do we deal with some of this stuff? And we are not comfortable with unanswered questions. And we need to work toward, and again, this is very difficult, toward being comfortable with what we cannot solve. I don't know about you, but I want an answer. I want to know that in 3 days, my sister is going to be this place in her physical therapy or this place in her occupational therapy. Well, I know that's not true. I've worked with people for actually over 50 years now, and I started my career in college when I was at Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, with older people who had disabilities. Ambiguous loss needs reflection and recognition, and it requires a paradoxical thinking. It's not either or, it's both and. And I think we are so much of a culture of either or that it could be both and. Hard for me, hard for all of us. There is discomfort with unanswered questions. But the flip side of this, I think we can look at as well, and that has to do with how we deal with losses with a sense of resilience. And I think that's where people are at the end of their caregiver journey or have just, ended the hands-on part. And by the way, there's still bits and pieces of the caregiver journey if a loved one is in long-term care or someone else is caring for them. It's different. And because death ends a life but not a relationship, even when a person has died, there are bits and pieces of a person. I hear my Aunt Tony talking in my head sometimes. And she is, again, a guiding star for me as I live out my work in this field. Bouncing back from setbacks is a part of resilience. Returning to a sense of balance. Resilience becomes a buffering factor in challenges. Having a future purpose. It can be small, it can be teeny, it doesn't have to be great. And we become stronger in challenges as we deal with our own resiliency and we celebrate our own resiliency. So the next picture, I think, kind of shares a picture that I like, that tenacious little plant coming through all that sand. We have that ability to be resilient. So what are some of the ways that we can become more resilient? We make connections. Now, I know this is hard in COVID, but even a card or a phone call, sometimes we have to reach out to other people because they may not get what you're going through, and we have to be gentle with them because they may try to tell you to get over your grief or you should be here or whatever. You need to be mindful of who you are as a person. I struggle with that, with other people's ideas of where I should be, when, and what I should do. And even after 53 years, my husband and I are real different ways of how we make those connections. I'm really extroverted. He's really introverted. And so we make those connections in very different ways. Avoiding crisis is insurmountable. Sometimes we have to break that crisis down into small pieces we can control. We know that change is a part of living. Being resilient helps us to understand that we need to accept that change as a part of living, and we move towards goals. As I mentioned this morning, part of hope is having goals, and it may be this morning I'm going to do one thing. I had got a Facebook posting from a friend of mine who cares for his sister who's developmentally disabled. And and she's a real go-getter, but COVID's really set her on edge, and she said, I'm finding that I celebrate if I get one thing done a day when I used to do 15. And this lady was a ball of fire. But I think COVID's done that to a lot of us, and that sense of time. So to be resilient, we need to find a sense of purpose, and a lot of people find their meaning in the caregiving. We need to take as decisive actions as we can take and not worry about what others think. And we need to look for opportunities for self-discovery. And this is where the creative arts come in. These are really, really important. And I'm a musician and I'm a poet. And for me, getting some of that out, and I'm not getting it out in the same way I did before COVID, because I'm not a part of groups to do that in the same way. So I have to be really intentional about that. And then we need to look at a positive view of ourselves. And this is where I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. Becomes a really important mantra for ourselves. keep things in perspective, and maintain a hopeful outlook. And those ideas have been adapted by me from material that was done by the American Psychological Association. I think they're really helpful to think about. And each of you can interpret that in your own way. I think one of the things, we're talking a lot at this conference about resources, what's available. And my goodness, you certainly have that. And you've got it available to you online. And all of the people from AGE and from AAA have been telling you about that. I think we need to nurture and be aware of our own inner strengths. And faith is one of them for many of us, a sense of humor, the ability to have problem-solving skills. Man, if you can do that, I have a friend who's an engineer who can't quite figure out this caregiving role as he cares for his mom and dad. But the first thing he figured out is he needed his binder. And nobody told him to do that. He just knew that. And he said to me, how do you deal with all this stuff? And I said, I do this for a living and I don't know for sure. But the problem-solving skills that he had as a person who was an engineer really helped him out in that regard. Family support and what I call, and those of you in the Midwest see, true grit, and that's important. Sometimes it gets in the way, and sometimes it really helps you to dig in and deal with stuff. So now I want to move on a little bit to say, okay, what can we do? And this material is, again, from Pauline Boss. And again, I would say to you, take what makes sense and leave the rest. The 7 guidelines are: find meaning, balance control and acceptance, broaden your identity, and manage your mixed emotions. The next one is a hard one. How do you hold on to that relationship and that person and let go of what you can't do at the same time? Imagine new hopes and dreams and take the time to mind yourself. So let's unpack this a little bit and talk about what this means at the time of ending that caregiving journey or at just having ended it. The first question is, who am I now? I've been a primary caregiver, now I'm not doing that, so who am I? I'm a person, I'm a reader, I'm a church member, I'm a community member, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a grandmother, I'm a mother. Ask, who am I now? What is that role besides having been the caregiver? I think sometimes we let those things go because we're so wrapped up in the caregiving. I'm a great believer in journaling or telling stories or writing the stories. We need to stay in the now of feelings. What's going on with me now? And we'll talk a little bit about how to deal with some of those feelings in a second, but what's going on now? That doesn't mean that the grief and loss isn't always there, but what's happening to me now? And use positive channels to share. This means don't talk to the person who's always negative. My friend Patty has the glass half full. And I'll tell you, there are days with COVID and caregiving for my sister and all this, and she can help me see that, yes, this is a problem, but this is also what I can do. Next question, understand how you grieve. Do you do more feeling or you do more doing? Some people have to get active. I know one friend who was dealt with a really hard grief who went out, and after his mom died, he cut cords and cords and cords of wood. Now that's not me. I'd probably get into more feeling and processing, but blending these two can sometimes help. And again, look to your own spiritual and religious teachings for help, and ask your religious advisors to help you with the process. Again, understand and affirm both and my one pastor said to me, and you should include because, therefore thinking, and it's okay to set boundaries. Don't let others define you in the meaning of yourself. So the first thing is to discover meaning. The second thing, it relates to this whole thing that this conference is about, that we can balance control and acceptance. Control your thinking about it and acting even as things change. Things are going to change, and they have been changing. Clarify what can be controlled and what can't. I can't make somebody's cancer go away, but I can control how my loved one feels about me as we share, or as we share these last moments together. Or I cannot control the fact that she's no longer with me or he's no longer with me, but I can control how I think about our relationship over time. Sometimes letting go is the way to stay in charge. And I love this next picture because I think it's how balancing control works for us. We're like those rocks sitting on those tiny rocks, and we're just kind of balancing. It's tough. Next slide. We can expand the idea of who we are. Revise your identity to fit the ambiguity. You've been caregiver so long. What's your identity now? Consider the needs to forgive or ask forgiveness. Maybe you feel like you ought to, shoulda, coulda, woulda, and you didn't. So can you ask forgiveness or forgive yourself when you weren't what you think now you should have done? We can rethink and reframe the roles we have. And I love this picture because we are all of these things in a new definition of who we are. We are all of these things. Next slide. It's important to resist retreating from others. And like we were saying, in this time of COVID, that's hard. How do you get out there? How do you get the support? Reach out to and be honest with your supports. Please tell people how you're feeling. Nobody can read your mind, but do it with people who you trust and who love you with your warts. Build on resilience and inner strength that we just talked about, and stay healthy. If you aren't healthy, and I can't tell you how many carers end up having a problem because they didn't look after a lump that they found or something that wasn't quite right. And question the family rules about how you should have been a caregiver. The issue of understanding mixed emotions, these things all exist, and there's a wonderful piece in your handouts about this, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but realize that fear, anger, guilt, sadness, and joy all coexist, and that ambivalence is normal. This ambiguity is normal. And again, share those tough feelings with trusted others. If you're one of those trusted for some others for somebody else, don't attempt to think you know, because you've been through it in your own way, that you understand. I think it's important that we understand that deep sadness is a normal part of grief in caring. It needs to be acknowledged and processed in a way that makes sense to you. And I want to make sure that you understand that many, many people in the roles that you're in are really sad. It's okay. But there is a difference between depression and sadness, and they're often related. But if someone goes way beyond this, you may be struggling with the depression and may need to seek some professional help and support. The next thing about holding on and letting go, how do you hold on to this person, the core of who that soul, that personhood of the person you're caring for, and letting go, letting other people in the nursing home or at home take care of them, or letting go of them because they're physically no longer here on this earth. Be in the here and now while planning the future. Attend to your own needs. It is okay to take space. It is okay to walk away. One of my friends who lost his wife a year ago said he just needed that time of being away. Improve the space that you're in. Find a space to be, or find a place that is yours where it's a worry-free zone. I think some of us need to do that. You need to let go of the unchangeable. We aren't going to change a cancer diagnosis, although miracles happen, but probably we're not. Remember that you are doing and did the best you can with what you knew at the time you were a carer. Just keep remembering that, because that's really hard. And avoid toxic relationships. If you know your daughter thinks she really messed up and how you took care of dad, and now look at where you are, then limit listening to her tell you about what you didn't do and what wasn't right. There is a place, though, for imagining new hopes and dreams. And I think this is where this time can be a time of new growth and new birth. We can affirm the spiritual and or religious beliefs we have. We can reflect on that meaning and purpose. And we can remember always, as I said earlier, that moving on with life doesn't mean getting over loss and grief. We still remember, and in those memories are sacred memories for us and for our loved ones. We can adapt family events to share positive experience. Boy, are we adapting family events now. We're going to have a 50th birthday party for my daughter tomorrow, and we should all be together, but instead she's a musician, she's going to be doing a concert on Zoom that we're all going to share. Sad, but it's the way it has to be. And that's true for all of us right now in this time of Zoom. Simple rituals can mark changes and offer a way to deal with life transition. If not only religious traditions, and in the Jewish and Christian traditions, we have a lot of life cycle traditions that are in our forms of worship, but I think it's important that we can develop our own rituals as well. And you may think, some people have done some things, long-term partners, the partner has taken the wedding ring off and the other person's ring off when it was time to move on from that. Other people don't do that. Everybody's different. Do what needs to be done. And remember to share the joy. We can reframe those situations, as I mentioned this morning. Pauline Boss, who wrote a lot of this material, has a wonderful story. Recently, I heard her speak about what it's like, and she was a caregiver to somebody with dementia before he died. But recently, she was told about her own health, that she can't have caffeine. She said it really made her mad because she needed her cup of coffee as a Minnesotan. But she said, now I drink my hot water every morning in the finest china cup that I own, because I have to reframe how I see that time of drinking something that was a morning ritual. So now I want to move on to how do we practice self-care? Remember, it's a strength to care for yourself. It's okay to worry, and these came from Barry Jacobs, who some of you have heard. It's okay to worry, but don't ruminate. Don't go over and over and over and over and over and over and over something. Don't catastrophize. Instead of thinking of what's the worst thing that can happen and build onto that, think about what can I do now to make a small change, and harness worry and what can I do now. And I loved his idea of, you're going to give yourself a specific time to worry, and that's the time to worry, and then move on with it. And then you spend that time worrying productively, and then you move on to the next. I forget to do that, and I'm a catastrophizer, so it's hard. One carer shared with me, even Superman is Clark Kent most of the time. And I think, again, Amy Goyer's comment from yesterday, I can do anything, but I cannot do everything, is really important to reflect on here. Remember to breathe, monitor the amount of information you take in, get enough rest, and be honest with yourself and others about your feelings. Take time to deal with those feelings. Don't get pressured by others. Work on the unfinished business and seek forgiveness. Seek respite, seek time away, and reach out to your caring community. And remember that the resources that you have in your area and all the resource material that's available that can be sent to you from this conference can be helpful. Find support groups. Support groups are really helpful. At times, we need to pull away from life, and we need to embrace the silence. And a friend of mine who lost his wife in 2006 talks about, as his wife was dying of really difficult cancer, as other people came into care, and when she died, He really needed to pull away from people, and people were worried about him. But he said, I needed to find that spiritual time and space for me to be able to embrace the silence. And if need be, consider professional help. Put on music, move and feel. I'm a great person for music and art and poetry, and I think it heals me. It heals many of us. What are the creative things we can do? Find moments of joy and embrace the wonder of small things. Embrace that bird at the bird feeder, or the new shoots coming up, or the vegetables and the plethora of things coming out of gardens right now, at least here. Use your spiritual and religious practices and strengths. Share your narrative. Write it down. And show compassion to yourself. Showing compassion and mercy to yourself is where this started. So you're at the end of a long fought journey for you and your care partner. Remember, you did the best you could. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself. And in a minute, I'm going to have you respond in a chat. But ask yourself the questions. Where do I want to be in my journey? What are my internal strengths in this new normal time of COVID and not being a full-time hands-on carer? And who do I need to ask to assist me in my journey? So I want you all to reflect on that for just a moment. And then I'm going to ask you in the chat to just put a word or two about what your internal strengths are. Identify for them for yourself, and just quickly put them in the chat when you had a chance to reflect. Patience, Fred. Right, patience. Important internal strength. I want to hold into the good times my brother and I had and let go of the anger of his passing. Right. Still helping others, but not full-time, Serena. Good. These are very, very poignant answers. Still have a strong constitution. I'm very patient with things and have a good sense of humor, from John. Thank you, John. Yeah. Taking the time to go inside and find these becomes important. Thank you for those. I want to go back one slide, Rob, to the question about in the world is enjoying beauty, helping others, someone else. That came from Teresa. So what I'm going to challenge you to do is to go home and while you're there, I guess you are home right there, ask these questions of yourself. Where do I want to be in my journey? Maybe journal about it, or maybe write it down on a piece of paper. Really reflect on those internal strengths. You all were able to name them. That's good, but we tend to see the negatives rather than the half full glass of the strength. And then the hard question is, who do you need to be vulnerable to and ask to assist you in my journey? It's hard because the people you may have thought were going to be there for you, like my aunt I thought would be there, was not there when my daughter was born with a lot of problems. But other people came to be around me during that time. And so during this time of ending the caregiver journey and being at the end, there may be people you thought might have been, should have been, would have been, who can't. So who can you ask, and who will be there to help you in that journey? These are wonderful strengths that you all bring up, and I really encourage you to focus on that. Being at the end of this journey, this caregiver journey, and not being the hands-on full-time carer journey, I think is difficult for all of us. But I think new life can spring forward on the journey after caring. Just like that new plant shoot that comes up through the soil in the early part of planting season and in our gardens, I think we can become like that as well. So I wish you well on this journey. It's not an easy one. I want you to remember that you are not alone, that you're doing the best that you can do with who you are, and that there are people around you to support you, and that you have the strength within yourself to be able to get through this. It's never easy. It's not hard, but there is strength and resilience in all of us that we can build on. I could just quickly have the next 2 slides. So I put on the end of this a couple of slides, Pauline Boss's work, which I think is really helpful, and some other things that you may find helpful as well. I want to thank you all for your sharing today. This is how you can get in touch with me. I'd be glad to email back and forth if you have further questions. This is a hard topic. I wish we could be together, and I'm giving you a virtual hug now. Take one step at a time and know that you are not alone. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much, Marty. We really appreciate you being with us today. And this is a very difficult thing for us to talk about. It's hard to be honest about grieving because it is such a personal thing. But you've got Marty here now. And I'm going to bring back Patty Bordy from the Area Agency on Aging, and also bring in Melissa Crawford, also from the Area Agency on Aging. This is an opportunity for you to ask your questions, or if you just have something you want to share, it would be wonderful to share what you have. One of the great things about our 19 years of this conference that we found is, as Patricia and Marty said, when we're able to be all in the same room, when we have it at the hotel, we're all together as caregivers together, getting to learn from each other and getting to talk to another caregiver, and realizing that the person sitting next to me at the lunch is going through the same issues that I'm having, that they're having with their mom, that I'm having with my dad. And so it's that opportunity. Unfortunately, we're not in the same room, but we are kind of. We're all here together now, and we have this opportunity that we can talk with each other. So use this chat feature right now. If you've got something great that you want to share, if you have a question that you'd like for Marty or Melissa or Patty to delve into, let's have that conversation now. We've got time left in our session, so let's do that. Patricia, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you facilitate this conversation. But while we've got this opportunity, let's take advantage of it.
Okay. John asks this important question. It's easy to confuse grief with self-pity. How does one avoid the latter? It's a great question.
Yeah, it's not easy because there's a lot of frustration and anger in grief that happens. And for me personally, I have to go into my religious belief system to help me to process that and realize, for people in the Jewish and Christian traditions, the Psalms have laments. People lamented, and they weren't self-pity. They were just lamenting about the world. Other traditions have different things that they use, but that's one thing, is to go into your tradition if you have one. The other thing is to realize that the whole grieving process in our society is not valued. And because we don't share it as openly as we might think we're delving into self-pity, where really is the society doesn't know how to deal with grief. I'm not always sure I know how to deal with grief, but I think going back into to the mindfulness that you have in yourself and your belief systems, I think is really important, and just lay it all out about how you're feeling. And that will be how it works for me. It can work for some people. I don't know. Melissa, you may have a comment on that too.
like you, these are difficult questions, and I guess we process. Even the words themselves might have different meanings to different individuals. You know, I may understand grief one way and self-pity another way for someone else. And I think, like you mentioned, like we know, grief should be a process. It is a process. Self-pity has that in there about self. I think if we're grieving over a loss, over something fading out, clearly that's easy to say, okay, that's grief. And we're involved in that, so it's how it affects me. But I guess if the theme is really about me, you know, now I'm this, now I don't have that, and now I can't this, and now I can't, you know, I do feel like the tone has shifted and can get really deep inward, and you can really get into a pit, and we're no longer making motion working through the grief. So if you find yourself, I think, feeling like you're in a pit with the same exact negative thoughts over and over again, and they're really, I guess, directed towards self, then that maybe that is, you know, some self-pity. And not that we can't have some self-pity. You just don't want to dig a pit for yourself. That would be my, you know, my concern, is that we're not moving.
Right. We have another question that Roger asks, since you've described yourself as a poet, how do you use your poetry in the grieving process?
Oh, I read it to people who are grieving. I use the Psalms of Lament. I do write some of my own, but I'm not published. Somebody asked that question too. It's just for my own use. But I find that sometimes when I process things, not just grief, but, you know, changes and challenges. There's a wonderful book written by some people who come from the Buddhist tradition, where they actually do a workbook where they work through things like hope and wisdom and other things relating to the grieving process, using the process of poetry. And I think I've done a little work with that, and that's been helpful too. And all of a sudden I can't remember their names, but there are some people who've actually done some work that way.
Great. We're going to have lots of opportunities to share extra information, you know, after the conference is over. So you can send that to us.
Okay.
This is a good question. Please give more examples of ambiguous grief and describe it a little bit more.
It's ambiguous loss.
Loss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things Pauline Boss talks about is the whole example of dementia. So you've got the person sitting in front of you, but the person doesn't know you. So you've lost the person that you knew, but there's still a person there. So it's ambiguous in that the person has not died, they're still there, but they don't know you, and you don't know them in the same way. And intimate partners, long-term partners, marriages, partnerships, where the person is your wife, and they look at you and said, I haven't seen my husband, he hasn't been here, and you've been there faithfully for 60 years.
Yeah.
The loss of that, the person's physically there, but they don't understand who you are. And that's obviously an issue for a lot of people struggling with dementia, when they don't recognize their intimate partners or their kids or other people that they've been very close to.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Marty, I also really like your statement that this is not a cookbook for how to grieve, that everybody grieves in their own way. Yeah. My father-in-law, his wife passed away 10 years ago. And he, every day at 4 o'clock, goes to the cemetery without fail. And he goes to visit her and just spend some time there. That's kind of his meditation. His kids keep telling him that he's, you know, why are you doing that? You should be over her. And I've told him, everyone grieves in their own way. If that's what works for you, that's what works for you. Don't let anybody else tell you what you should or shouldn't do. And
That's key. Absolutely. Don't let anybody, and we worry about what other people are going to think or what they've told us. Or I love it when I hear somebody say, well, it's been 6 months now. You should be over this grief. Baloney.
Yes.
6 months is when the grief really hits for some long-term partners. And we see this over and over and over again in the research. It's not at the beginning because everybody comes and they send cards and usually, not now, there's a ritual or a funeral or something. Now it's going to be 2 years from now or whatever. But 6 months from now, where's everybody? They've gone back home. You know, the church group has quit bringing meals. The neighbors maybe they invite you over. And worse, if you're a widow with a group of people who played cards as partners or did things together as partners, and now you're the fifth wheel, it gets to be all kinds of crazy stuff as well. So, you know, it's like 6 weeks and 6 months is when we ought to be worrying about people we're grieving. We need support, but I think that often gets lost when we say, get on with your life. And some people have been told that.
Yeah, and there are grief support groups throughout Central Texas, and we can connect you up with those if that's something that you want. Cynthia asked where she can print off the materials from today. So we're going to send everything directly to you. Later this week, we're going to send you the PowerPoints that Marty used today, so that you'll have all those resources at the end that had the books and the authors and all of that information. So you'll be able to look back at that. We're also going to send you the link to this video so that you can watch it again if you want, share it with whoever needs to see it. And also want to let you know that one of the other things we're going to send you is a survey for the conference, because everything that we do, again, we're doing for you. And we want to make sure that we're bringing you the information that you need on your journey. Serena said, thank you so much for this session because I've been asking for it. And I want you to know, we read every single survey that is sent to us. And that is how we plan for next year. Next year is our 20th anniversary of the Striking Balance Caregiver Conference.
Wow.
And it's very exciting. And so as soon as this one is complete, we will start planning for next year and start looking for the speakers. And we're looking specifically for the topics that you tell us you want. And that's how we plan every year. We take your surveys and you tell us what you want, and that's what we go and put together for us. We have time for just a couple more questions. If there's something that you would like to share. Again, this is an opportunity for us all to be in the room together. We're sitting around the table together talking. And so it's an opportunity for you to share something that may have worked for you. That's something that I always learn every time we do a Striking Balance Caregiver Conference. There's always some caregiver who says, you know, this works for me. And it's something brand new that I never knew. I'm caring for my parents, and I always find something that I can utilize that is so wonderful. And, you know, even if it's just, this helped me, you know, we know that we brought you what you needed. That's always wonderful. We also yes, Melissa.
I was just gonna pop in just real quick before we run out of time. You know, I know we've talked about a lot of the grieving, Marty, and you know, I know you said that deep sadness is normal, and that's very true, and we need to allow ourselves to. But I also appreciate how you spoke about imagining new hopes and dreams. So, you know, I know we're having some difficult questions right now, and we're talking about that, but I don't want to lose also the focus on imagining new hopes and dreams and how important it is, and how you can do that even though you're kind of either going through, you know, the ambiguous loss, different losses, little losses, you know, and not to feel guilty about doing that, but allow yourself some time. Because again, like I said earlier, you know, this season is going to pass. This day is going to pass. The sun's going to come up on another day. And are you prepared for that? Because, you know, I have an uncle that, you know, was with my granny, and when that day came, he really wasn't ready for it. He spent so much time focusing on what he was doing and the grief, which is you know, and I understand that we were in this journey together. And so a lot of his grieving afterwards was also complicated by the fact that he really didn't know, you know, what to do next, or how to live without, you know, the mother that he's cared for 30 something years. So I just think it's a really good point. I appreciate that point about take some time and think about that without feeling guilty about it. It's going to come. It is going to come. And, you know, on another note, my mother took care of my dad with the vascular, you know, dementia and Parkinson's. And she didn't necessarily plan for that sunny day, but when it got there, she had learned and grown so much through her caregiving thing that the only thing she really knew after that was to caregive, but she was a resource for other caregivers in a rural community. And they called in on her, and then all of a sudden she just had all these jewels and gems and things that she learned the hard way but could share with hurting families. And I mean, just the value of this journey, everyone needs to know you're gathering some valuable things, and you can, if nothing else just pops up, you have that to share. And, you know, so.
That's really important, Melissa. A person now, and I don't remember where I got this, but I remember for a while when I remembered to do this during one of the losses of one of my brothers. When my brother died of his brain tumor, it was very, very difficult time. And it was short-lived, but it was difficult because I was here and I flew back to Chicago in a snowstorm and all this stuff. But I remember thinking, waking up in the morning, someone had suggested, say to yourself, what am I going to do with this glorious whole day that's available to me right now? Right. And it sounds hokey, but it really does help do exactly what you're talking about. That's the glass half full rather than, oh my God, this is really shocking, frightening, etc. Because it was a real mess for our family. And he was younger than me, and he hadn't prepared well, and we had all this stuff to deal with, which was like this. I mean, just kept going. But out of that came some really interesting growth for my sibs and I around that. But it was a reframing of thinking about that experience. So that's good.
And I think that idea of the anniversaries and having people remember them and recognize them and not shy away from that, it is super important to the individual who you reach out to. And I know that folks have done that for me in a number of cases, and it's really helped a lot. Yeah.
Somebody was on this journey with me, and it's
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And just because your caregiving journey is ending doesn't mean that our relationship, Age of Central Texas and Area Agency on Aging, is going to end with you, because, like Marty said, it doesn't just stop. You know, there's no finite deadline on it, and your need for us will continue, and we're going to continue to be right there for you.
Do you know, Rob, I want to just emphasize that I worked with a woman in the long-term care who had lovely children. She was in her 90s. The kids came every day to visit, whatever. And she died. Then her son was diagnosed with dementia. And he kept the relationship with us. Now, he's in his 70s. But then, unfortunately, their son had a motorcycle accident and came to live with us post that. And I'm thinking, we had this relationship over time. And so we need to remember that we may have been helped now, but we're known to people with that agency is there. And we may, even me as a social worker, I have to go and find out how to sign up for Medicare D, was really humbling, because I signed people up for Medicare in the 60s. But it is important that we keep those relationships and those connections, because generationally we have this, and a partner may end up being a person we see again. So knowing the people, knowing that they're there, that's a comfort. It's comfort to me.
Yeah, and as Patricia said, we have folks who come back for our caregiver conferences year after year after year, even after their caregiving journey is ended, because it is it's like going to church camp for a lot of us. It is a
Community.
you get that lift. And being around other caregivers, even after your journey is ended, is very uplifting because, Melissa, like you said, I've got something I can share. I'm going to learn something new that I can carry with me and use later. So it's important to understand that it is okay to carry some of this with you, because it was a huge part of your life for a very long time. And you're not just going to pack it in a suitcase and stick it in the closet and forget it ever happened. But it is also important to look toward the horizon, because that sun's going to come up in the morning, and that's where you want to be walking toward.
Right.
And we want to say thank you to Serena, who had one final comment saying, I have been attending these events for more than 15 years. And although I'm not a full-time caregiver, I have never failed to learn something.
Yay.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yay.
And
Thank you, Serena.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you, Marty, so much for sharing your
Yes.
whole day with us. We appreciate all of your expertise, your knowledge, and it's been really a blessing to have you with us. Patty, Melissa, thank you for joining us on this session, especially. Melissa, you've been on several of our sessions, and we really, really appreciate everything that you've shared. And most importantly, thank you so much
Big hugs.
for letting us, thank you for letting us give you our virtual hugs today. Thank you for trusting us to give you the information to help you on your caregiving journey. And we'll say it again, you are never alone on this journey, because you have got Ages of Central Texas, you've got Area Agency on Aging, you have AARP, you have all of these great organizations that exist here, who exist for no other reason than to help you. And it is never, ever, ever wrong to say, I can use some help. So
yes,
we want to thank you for joining us. Remember, we've got 2 more sessions tomorrow, and then we will be concluding our 19th annual Striking Balance Caregiver Conference. Looking forward to our 20th anniversary. So we hope that you have a wonderful day. We hope that we were able to provide something today that will help you today and help you tomorrow and on through the rest of your journey. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we will see you very soon.